Good afternoon. How are you today? Well, it's a warm but pleasant 82 degrees. How about that? Jefferson has brought us an 82-degree day, and there's like no motion, so there's no wind. And the sun is out, so it's pretty pleasant. You can probably hear the birds in the background. They follow me some days. Or they do a tag team. It's hard to tell. I can recognize some of them, but others not so much. We're spending a lot of time these days. Basically, our society is comfortable with ageism. You're too young or you're too old, and you're never Goldilocks just right. And one of the references at the Correspondents' Dinner last night, the White House Correspondents Association dinner, was, how about Jimmy Carter? He's 99, maybe he should run. But the new age fight has to do with a move to try to intimidate Associate Justice Sotomayor, who is 69, had been on the court since 2009, to get off the court. What they'd like is to have another seat. Of course, I'm not sure they want it right now, and I'm not sure who's pushing it. Probably both sides for different reasons. And when you consider that by comparison, she's younger than Alito, who's 74, and she's younger than Thomas, who's 75. Now, former Associate Breyer is taken to the airwaves, or he's been talking about his book. So in one of those interviews, they asked him about this, and he said, she's a spring chicken. What are you talking about? And then he was asked, what ages make sense? And he says, I don't know, 81, 82, 83. He said in the 80s somewhere. He said, but under the law as it is now, if you can live to 150, you can serve on the court. So that's something to keep in mind. I don't think we've reached that age. I think 120 is about the highest. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's correct. And I'm not sure I want to be 120. But I've seen some pretty vibrant people in their advanced ages. And it's not like I have a choice. We put one foot in front of the other, have resolve, have something that brings us on, that's curious, that's important, loves, adventures, trials, tribulations, that's life. And how you handle it, is it a work of art? Is it a struggle worth observing? Whatever it is, that's you. That's what you do. Now, returning to a sillier area, RFK Jr., he's called Trump unhinged because Trump attacked him for taking votes away from Trump. Now, that's nice. You feel like you're watching the Two Stooges instead of the three. Although RFK Jr. has added an interesting issue. He wants to legalize marijuana nationally. I'm not against that. I think that makes sense. It would be licensed, and they'd tax it, and they'd do things like that. But we sort of need a uniform system right now, and this is why doing things state by state creates a kind of gotcha moment that's unfair. Nobody can do anything about it, and the feds are still insisting they could go after you if they wanted, while individual states are saying not so. So that's something to think about. Continuing a discussion about age, Biden last night at the White House Correspondents Association dinner said he was in a race where age mattered. He said, I'm a grown man and I'm running against a 6-year-old. That's what we like to hear. A little of that fight. A little of that childhood oomph. A little bit of Irish. And he has it. And I thought it was interesting, his comic lines, they were good. But he is more true to himself, his persuasion and his leadership, when he talks about the things he cares about. And I thought I saw an evocation of what he did in the interview with Howard Stern, formerly the shock jock. And that was personal, honest, authentic. It imbued confidence that this was a man, a good man, who deserved to be president, even with the differences I or you may have with him, because who agrees? Occasionally I understand some husbands and wives disagree. Not in our household, of course, but elsewhere. So in terms of spare questions out there, as a product of Columbia, I was a Columbia undergraduate as part of a 3-2 science engineering program. I got 3 years at Fordham, physics degree, and then went to Columbia Engineering for 2 years and got an engineering degree, and then I went to Columbia Law School. And so I was there in '68 when we had what they called the riots. It was very interesting because the university setting brought me into so many different types of people and so forth. And my mind had learned to think a certain way, and Columbia, because it was a universe of difference, helped me along. And because I had a lot of credits from Fordham, I could take other courses at Columbia that weren't in the, the core curriculum for engineering. And when the riots occurred, quote riots occurred, they started out as demonstrations, and they were. The quote violence, if you want to say that that's what happened, were students spearheaded by SDS, Students for a Democratic Society, who took over buildings on the campus and held teach-ins and stuff like that. And it went on long enough. Professors joined these discussions. There was a marriage at one. I don't remember if there was a birth at another. And the university sort of watched the kettle boil a little bit. And they got bad advice, I think. Told to bring the police into a campus. And it makes you think of third world reactions to differences. And if there's something that shows kinship between these two movements, it is that students who were aware believed their government was betraying them. And after several years of people coming back from the so-called Vietnam War, they saw that basically it was a war of attrition. The government didn't have a policy. Ultimately, it was disclosed that they were lying about the numbers of bodies and dead in that attrition. And the betrayal, if you will, by the parental government was taken to heart. Now, more locally, there were questions about the university's relationship with Harlem, which was literally blocks away. You turned east when you were on Columbia, and you walked several blocks, you were in Harlem. And there was a gymnasium that, the question was raised, should it be open to the people? And some of these questions are obviously stretches to create conflict. And the free speech movement had been in California, and so some people from that came to Columbia. So it became free speech plus, and that movement, nobody had a tent, they had buildings to stay in. But the administration was convinced they should have police come on campus. And they did. They did two things. One, they literally dragged people down the steps of the buildings. And then the people who were supposedly allowed to watch, who were students, who would be safe if they stayed beyond a certain point, the cops turned on them as well. Now, over the weeks and months afterwards, there were all sorts of dismissals and so forth of these actions. And because it was toward the end of the year, everything just dissipated. And I became a staffer on a project to restructure Columbia University, funded by the Ford Foundation, and run by several law professors who became lifelong friends of mine and helped guide me along. One became the dean of the law school, and the other was the director of the Legislative Drafting Fund. When they interviewed me, they asked me, with your science background, are you just interested in the science of how we do this? So the reason I go through that is because there are lessons learned from that are in a report that we put together. And part of the remedy was to create a university senate. So there would be organs to dispel, if you will, democratic urges and complaints and requests for explanations for what's going on. I can't say from the reports what devices may or may not have been used. And it appears that Columbia, my alma mater, twice over, it appears that the complaints, which could be in both directions, and I assume are on some level, is that the Israelis and Arabs are quite upset about the killing of innocents and men and women and children because they happen to be in the way, collateral damage. And then we have the terrible attack on Israel. And some might be tempted to say a plague on both your houses. That's not a solution for men and women who believe in peace and who believe that we're supposed to negotiate to a settlement. But Columbia, in the category of lessons learned, should not have called in the police. It's not easy to deal with difficult problems. And some of the things that from a distance seem obvious seem that were done on the campus. That is, you can demonstrate, and here's where you can, and during these hours. But people push the envelope. And I think this is another youthful, and I don't say this in the pejorative, youthful reaction to the government parent not living up to its responsibility. And so the release becomes civic disobedience, or just plain disobedience, or outrage, or prejudice, or hate. And that's a failure of a government function. And it's not the university function. It is the government's function. The Hill, for all that time, that couldn't come around to addressing this difficult situation, of course in Israel and Gaza, but also in Ukraine. And so political urges and upsetness and a desire to make things right will find a way. So people past that point of trust. And there are those, including the dim-witted Speaker of the House, who went up to Columbia, got booed, as he should. Let's talk about a man who's insensitive to difficult situations. He said, oh, we should have the National Guard there. And then people like me, and a lot of you probably, remember what that meant at Kent State. Amateur, and that's what they are, amateur soldiers who become cannon fodder in my day in Vietnam if they don't legitimately not evade, but avoid the draft. Well, now we have them, and we're going to put them on a campus, and are they going to be angry as well? And are they going to do something stupid, like shoot and kill somebody? So it's a big mistake. And there's one jurisdiction, I want to say it's D.C., where the police refused to come on campus to bring, quote, peace and order, because it doesn't. So that's kind of the situation. And I assume that the energy and perhaps some cooperation will make it run out. And there'll be some sort of agreement about what to do about grades and finishing up and graduation. And when that's over, hopefully we'll make advances between May to September so that we're in a better place. These seasons of roiling political impatience and hurt and distrust can't be just erased away by saying, you're not allowed to do that. Because these issues transcend an individual appetite to get an education in a place that they think is aiding and abetting their own sufferance and the sufferance of others. Now, that's a nice description. The prescription for how to handle it is more difficult. And I think Columbia's already said they're not calling in the National Guard. And those who don't have universities at heart, they're busy trying to run down who runs these universities on the theory that it's better you have no education than you have a university education that opens you up to all the possibilities of life. So there's that. Returning, in my mind, to what Trump's getting away with. We know all the other things. But one that's distressing to me is how he is meeting with world leaders. You know, for example, excuse me, we got a car coming here. Orban, and we have Cameron from Great Britain, and we have Duda, and he's meeting with them, and he's discussing policy. Is he negotiating? And the reason I ask that is, not only is that a way to undermine an existing president, we have one president at a time, and we don't have a former criminal posing as president, former president who is a criminal, negotiating our international policy. If he wins, besides all that disappointment, that's a different story. But there's a so-called Logan Act, which specifically prohibits a citizen who is not authorized to be negotiating our policy. So we have a few things going on, but it is a gorgeous day. And I assume tomorrow we'll be back at the 40s, but it's nice to have this today. So I hope you're well. I hope you got out. I hope it's pleasant wherever you are. And happy Sunday. And I say good day to you from my cathedral of trees. Bye-bye.